The furnace technician called me on a Tuesday morning in late October, and the way he said my name when I picked up, careful, like he was trying not to startle me, I knew before he said another word that something had changed. My mother had been gone for 5 months. I'd been putting off the repairs since the spring, partly because of money, partly because walking into that house still felt like stepping into a room where someone had just left. Her reading glasses on the side table, the notepad by the phone with her handwriting on it. I kept meaning to pack things up and I kept not doing it. The technician's name was Dale. I'd hired him through a company out of Barrie, someone my brother-in-law had used the year before. He was supposed to go in, check the old oil furnace, tell me whether it was worth converting to gas or if I should just replace the whole system before I listed the house. That was the plan, a 2-hour job, maybe 3. I think you need to come out here, he said. I was at work. I had a meeting in 40 minutes. Is it a gas leak? Do I need to call someone? No, nothing like that. He paused. It's not an emergency, but I think you should come yourself, and maybe don't bring anyone else just yet. I stood in the parking garage for a moment after I hung up. The concrete smelled like exhaust and cold air coming in from the ramp. I called my manager and said something had come up with my mother's estate, which wasn't entirely untrue. It took me just under an hour to drive to Collingwood. The house was a side split on a quiet street near the edge of town, the kind of neighborhood where people had lived for 30 years and knew each other by first name. My mother had moved there with my father in 1989, the year I turned 7. My father died in 2011. She stayed the way she always stayed. She said she liked the yard. Dale's truck was in the driveway. He met me at the door before I could knock, which was strange, and he didn't say anything right away. He just led me through the kitchen and down the half-flight of stairs into the utility room off the basement. The furnace was old. I'd known that. It sat in the corner the way old furnaces do, squat and rust-spotted, with the kind of bulk that made you feel like it had always been there, and always would be. Dale had pulled it about 2 feet away from the wall to get at the flue connection. That's when he'd seen it. Behind where the furnace had stood, flush against the concrete wall, there was a section of drywall that didn't match the rest. The texture was slightly different. The paint was a shade off, not dramatically, but enough that if you were looking at it straight on with the furnace moved away, you'd notice. Someone had patched it or added it after the rest of the basement had been finished. Dale pointed his flashlight at the baseboard. The bottom edge didn't sit flat against the floor. There was a gap maybe half a centimeter, and the seam on the left side didn't quite line up with the stud pattern. I've been doing this for 22 years, he said. That's not original. Somebody put that in after. I looked at it for a long moment. The light in the utility room was a single bulb on a pull string, and it made everything look a little yellow, a little uncertain. Did you open it? I asked. No, he said. I didn't think it was my place. I appreciated that. I still do. He lent me a pry bar. I worked the seam on the left side first, and the drywall came away more easily than I expected, like it had been designed to be removed. It wasn't screwed in. It was held with small toggle clips, the kind that can be released from the front if you know where to press. Whoever had built this knew what they were doing. Behind it was a shallow alcove, maybe 40 centimeters deep, framed into the concrete. The inside had been lined with a thin layer of rigid insulation, the pink foam kind, cut and fitted carefully to all 4 sides. At the back of the alcove, sitting on a small wooden shelf that had been fastened to the wall, was a fireproof document box. Gray metal, the kind you can buy at any Canadian Tire, with a combination dial on the front and a handle on top. The kind people use for passports and insurance papers and birth certificates. There was no dust on it. That was the thing that stopped me. Everything else in that basement, the top of the furnace, the ledge along the window well, the old shelving unit with the paint cans, had that fine gray film that accumulates in unused spaces. But this box was clean, like someone had been in here not long ago. I carried it upstairs without opening it. I don't know why. I think I needed to be somewhere with more light. I set it on the kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten breakfast as a kid, where my mother used to sit with her coffee and the crossword on Saturday mornings. The table had a slight wobble on the left side from when my sister and I had tried to move it by ourselves in 1997 and cracked the leg. She'd never had it properly fixed. Dale stayed downstairs. I could hear him moving around, going back to work. He was decent like that. I looked at the combination dial. 3 digits. I tried her birthday, March 14th, 314, nothing. I tried the year the house was bought, 1989. That was 4 digits, so I just tried 989, then 089. Nothing. I tried my 046, being the 4th of June, the way she sometimes wrote dates. Nothing. I tried my sister's birthday, 123. That wasn't it either, but I sat there for a second after because I realized I'd just entered my sister's birthday as 123, like I was testing a default password, like her birth date was a placeholder, and I wasn't sure what that said about me. I tried the year my father died, 011, nothing. I tried the number of the house, 274, and then I stopped and looked at the box for a minute. There was a small scratch near the bottom right corner, a thin line like it had been knocked against something metal. The handle had a slight tarnish near the rivets. My mother was not a person who hid things. That's what I would have told you before that afternoon. She was practical and steady, and she didn't carry drama the way some people do. She called once a week, every Sunday after church, and she talked about the weather and the neighbor's new dog and whatever was growing in the garden. She asked about my marriage when it was good, and she didn't ask about it when it wasn't, which I think was its own form of wisdom. After my father died, she planted a row of apple trees along the back fence. She said she wanted something that would still be there in 20 years. I tried 427, which was the area code for the region before they split it, which my mother sometimes used as a shorthand for home. The lock turned. I'm not sure I breathed for a moment after that. Inside the box, sitting on a piece of folded burgundy felt, there were 3 things. An envelope sealed, with my name written on the front in my mother's handwriting. A smaller envelope with my sister's name. And at the bottom of the box under the felt, a cashier's check made out to a name I didn't recognize. The check was from a credit union in Owen Sound. It was dated 14 months before my mother died. It was made out to someone named Terrence Wolk, and the amount was $11,000. I sat with that for a while. I opened my envelope first. It was a single sheet of her notepaper, the kind with the small blue border, and her handwriting was steadier than I expected. She'd written it sometime when she was still well before the last few months. She wrote that she was sorry she hadn't told me sooner. She wrote that she'd thought about it many times and hadn't known how. She wrote that the money was a debt she'd been carrying for a long time, and that she'd wanted to settle it herself before she was gone, and that she had. She'd found Terrence Wolk through a lawyer in Owen Sound, a man named Sutherland who had helped her trace where he'd ended up. She'd mailed the check herself on a Thursday, driven to the post office on Hurf, Ontario, and that was the last piece of it. Then she wrote something I've turned over in my mind almost every day since. She wrote, "Your father knew. He always knew. But he said it wasn't our story to tell. He said the telling belonged to me, and that I'd know when it was time. I'm sorry I waited so long. I hope you understand that being sorry and being afraid can live in the same place without either one of them being a lie." I didn't know what the debt was exactly. There were no details in the letter about what had happened or how far back it went. She didn't explain who Terrence Wolk was to her, or what the original obligation had been. She'd settled it and left the evidence of it here, behind the furnace, in a box she'd expected someone to find only after she was gone. Or maybe she'd intended to tell me herself and hadn't gotten to it in time. I'm still not sure which one it was. I called my sister from the kitchen. I told her I was at the house, that I'd found something, that she should come when she could. I didn't tell her about the box over the phone. She lives in Guelph, so it would take her a couple of hours. I went back downstairs and told Dale he could push the furnace back, that I'd deal with the alcove later. He nodded and didn't ask me anything, and I was grateful for that in a way I didn't have the words for at the time. I made myself a cup of tea using the kettle that was still on the counter, her kettle, the same one she'd had since I was in university, and I sat at the kitchen table and looked out the window at the backyard. The apple trees she'd planted were still there. They'd gone past bearing for the season, but the branches were still full and the leaves had turned orange and deep yellow against the gray October sky. I thought about all the Sunday phone calls, the conversations about weather and the neighbor's dog and what was growing in the garden. I thought about how you can know someone your entire life and still not know the shape of what they carried. I thought about the fact that the box had no dust on it. If she'd placed that check in there 14 months before she died and then come back again to check it or to take it out or just to stand there, she'd done it recently enough that the dust hadn't had time to settle. She'd been down here in the last while before the illness got worse. She'd been managing this thing quietly the way she managed everything. My sister arrived at 4:15. The light was already going by then, the way it does in late October in Ontario, that early gray that reminds you winter is coming and it isn't asking for permission. I showed her the alcove first. She stood in front of it for a long time without saying anything. Then I brought her upstairs and put her envelope on the table in front of her. She put her hand on top of it and looked at me. "Did you read yours?" she asked. "Yes, is it?" She stopped. "Is it something bad?" I thought about how to answer that. "It's something I didn't know," I said, "but I don't think it's bad." She opened her envelope. I looked out the window while she read. When she was done, she folded the letter and put it back and didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "I had no idea, neither did I. She drove to Owen Sound to mail it herself, I know. My sister has a way of going quiet that isn't sad exactly. It's more like she's filing something carefully, making sure she understands it before she responds. She did that for a while. Then she said, I think she was embarrassed, not of what it was, of how long it took her. I've thought about that a lot since. The gap between knowing what needs to be done and being able to do it. My mother had lived with that gap for what sounded like decades, and when she'd finally crossed it, she'd done it alone, on a Thursday, at the post office on Hurontario, and she'd come home and put the evidence behind the furnace and sealed it up and never mentioned it. That's not weakness. I don't think it is. I think it's something more complicated than that. I think it's the kind of thing that doesn't have a clean name. The lawyer's name, Sutherland, led us somewhere eventually. My sister made a call 3 weeks later after we'd talked it through and decided we wanted to understand more. Mr. Sutherland was retired, but he remembered the file. He told us what he could, within what he said he was comfortable sharing, which wasn't everything, but it was enough to give us the shape of it. A situation from a long time ago, a wrong that had needed righting. A person who had been owed something and had eventually received it. He said my mother had been very clear about what she wanted. She'd said she didn't need acknowledgement, she didn't need anyone to know. She just needed it done before she was gone. Terence Wolk, we learned, had received the check and cashed it and never responded, which Mr. Sutherland said was also fine, that it hadn't required a response. Some things don't. I don't know what Terence Wolk made of it. I don't know if he understood where it came from or what it represented. Maybe he did. Maybe he'd been waiting for it longer than my mother knew. We listed the house in January. Before we did, I had the alcove properly closed, framed in and drywalled and taped and painted to match, with a good set of screws this time so it was solid. I didn't want to leave it the way it was, that careful secret space. It felt right to seal it back up. It felt like finishing something. The new furnace is a high-efficiency gas unit. The house sold to a young couple from Barrie. They're expecting their first child. The wooden shelf is still inside the wall. I didn't think to take it out, and I realized it only after the drywall was up. But I've thought about it since, and I think I'm at peace with that. There's something fitting about it, that small piece of wood fastened to the inside of that wall in the dark, holding nothing now, but still in the position of holding something. My mother put it there. She measured it, cut it, leveled it. She did a neat job of it, the way she did most things. It'll probably be there long after anyone alive remembers any of this. I still have the letter. I keep it in the drawer of my bedside table, underneath a couple of other things, so it isn't the first thing I see. I've read it maybe a dozen times. I keep coming back to that one line, the one about being sorry and being afraid living in the same place. I think she was right about that. I think she was right about a lot of things she never got around to saying out loud, and I think I spent a lot of years not understanding that silence could be a form of love too. Not a cold one, not a withholding one, but the kind that carries something it doesn't know how to put down. The apple trees were there when I drove by last April. They'd leafed out already. The new owners had put a small bench underneath the middle one. I drove slowly past and didn't stop. I didn't need to. Some things you carry with you. And eventually, if you're lucky, you figure out that carrying them doesn't have to feel like a weight. It can feel like keeping something alive. That's what I've been trying to do.